And Iain is a placemaking specialist who's focused on tackling high street empty shops challenges and improving the mix of shop types in towns and city centres or suburbs. Much of his town and city centre work's been with agents, landlords, businesses and communities using an audit, engage, encourage and promote approach, really aimed at focusing on the reduction of the number of vacant units. So thank you very much, Iain, for joining us today. I will hand over to you.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and thanks to everyone who's joined in. It's great to be with you and able to talk to you specifically about the issue of tackling empty shops and how that relates to the focus of today on our historic and heritage buildings. I'll move that forward. So the theme for me today is on tackling vacant units and turning them from an issue, and I'll explain a little bit more about why in different perspectives they are an issue, and turning them back into what they were and should always have been, into an asset. So that's me. I have worked in tackling empty shops in different places for nearly 10 years now, and at the beginning of this year started up the Vacant Shops Academy to support towns and cities, to support councils, business improvement districts and others who really wanted to play a part in tackling empty shops in their place, and to share with them the learning that I've had across those different places across that period of time. So the focus really is on your places. So thinking about the place where you live or the place where you work or both, what's its empty shops status? Does it have too many empty units? Has the situation changed, worsened or improved in recent years? And looking at the activity, the action on that issue, does your local council, you might work for one or be a partner organisation with one, does the local council know how many empty units there are in that place, just as a starting point? And beyond that, is it working to tackle the issue, or is it leaving that to others? And the rationale for setting up the Vacant Shops Academy, and for the approach that I'll outline shortly, is that there is a role for the place in tackling empty shops, in tackling vacancy. And that's based on a sense that although the heavy lifting in each individual letting is done by agents and by landlords and by the businesses who are involved, there is very much a role for the council, for the business improvement district in places where there is one, for the businesses, for the wider community and for a range of other organisations. And the approach that I've developed and used over that period of time in different places is very much based on that role for the place and how it can play a part and how it can make a difference. As you'll know from thinking, as I hope you did in the earlier part of this, about your own places, about the places that you work or the places that you live, many places around the country have more empty units than they need to have. And it's important, I think, just to emphasize that this is not just an agents and landlords thing. We can't and shouldn't leave it to agents and landlords, because we have a role, and also because the commercial property market has its own challenges that mean it is not able to make the impact that we would like as placemakers. It has its own challenges, which mean that it might not deliver the outcomes, even if it gets to the point of letting units, that we would like to see. And an experience of different projects across the number of years that I've been doing it is that the most successful, impactful projects are those where agents and landlords and businesses and the community and councils, where there are more than one, and business improvement districts, if they have one, are all working together on this. And it's worth emphasizing, as I go through this, that it's more than about numbers. It's also about the mix of types of uses, what there is in our place. One of the things that Chris Wade referred to earlier about our pride and place, it isn't just that there are more empty units or that we're letting empty units. It's about what the mix is, what the balance is, whether that is enough to attract people in and to encourage them to stay. And one of the most common types of feedback that we get from residents or from businesses when a new business opens up is, did we really need another one of those? Not another one of those. So it's more than about numbers. It's about the mix and types of uses, and our approach can impact positively on that as well. So why tackle empty shops? I'd like to think that this is a given, but I think it's also worth emphasizing for different audiences the different reasons why empty shops are an issue for us in our places. An obvious one, as you think about your places and you walk about, is they look bad in a lot of cases and get worse. They create a negative perception among residents. They have a negative impact on the pride of place that we've already talked about this morning. They can discourage residents from coming in and discourage visitors. So if you're an economy that relies on visitors coming in, there's a negative impact on them. There's a negative impact on the perception they have and maybe on what they tell others. So instead of being an ambassador for your place, they're giving a negative impression. And in social media age, that is even more significant because negative images can get round very, very quickly and in significant numbers. And as you'll have seen, if you've got vacant units in your places, they can quickly attract antisocial behaviour, provoke negative media stories. And if you've been on one already, you'll know how tough this is. Increase the risk of your place featuring in one of those national media worst for numbers of empty shops lists. So all things to avoid. There's also a significant financial impact for empty shops. They make things harder for existing businesses. So if you've got a business on a particular street and there's a section of empty shops around it looking bad, as we've described earlier, it makes it harder for you to do business, for you to attract customers in, and it increases the chances of those businesses leaving also. It discourages inward investment. One of the things that I do in my role is I encourage would-be new business owners to come to places where I'm working and set up their business there. And if you're walking around and there are a number of empty shops, it gives the wrong impression and might discourage those would-be new occupiers from starting up. There's a financial impact for the place too. If the council's a landlord, there's the reduced rental income, and potentially that gets worse if other tenants leave because of the issue. There's extra business rate bills for the council to pay if they're a landlord for a non-listed property, and reduced rate revenue also. So financial issues, and then all the cost of maintaining the unit while it's empty and refilling the vacancy and all the things that go along with that. And from a placemaking perspective, well, they're literally a waste of space. They're spaces that could be an opportunity for local businesses, for arts and cultural organisations, for social enterprise, and for community, especially in places that have got inclusive economy objectives. People and organisations and businesses who would love to have a place in our town and city centres, but can't because of the barriers that we need to work to overcome. And obviously, units becoming vacant mean job losses versus jobs being saved, where new businesses are coming in and taking on units. And perhaps the worst thing of all of this is that all of the above can contribute to a downward spiral. So once you start to get into a situation where you've got more empty units, the situation, unless you're working to tackle it, very likely gets worse. And you may have, we have certainly seen places around the country where the number of vacant units gets into significant levels, gets into 20 and in some cases 30%. So 1 in every 4, 1 in every 5, sometimes 1 in every 3 units are vacant, and that then gets to be really difficult to tackle. So over the nearly 10 years now, I've developed this approach that I've called Audit, Engage, Encourage, Promote. Those are the 4 stages of tackling empty shops that I think that the place, the council, the business improvement district, or partner organisations working with them can go. Audit the number of vacant units that you have and work to understand the backstory of every empty unit and work out what the challenges are. Engage with landlords and agents to understand what that backstory is and what the barriers are and how you can tackle them. Encourage them to work with you to tackle those issues and to bring in new businesses, or have your existing businesses expand or do something in a different way, in a different premises. And then promote the success, promote the good work, promote the new businesses that are coming in. It will help you to reduce the number of vacant units in your town or city centre. It'll improve the mix of businesses that you have because you are looking with your residents and your businesses about what's missing, what they would like to see, what they think would add value, encourage them to come in. Or so you're improving the mix of businesses, giving the landlords and the agents more choices when they come to letting units. And it tackles all those negative impacts that I've talked about vacant units having. I'm very happy to take questions as the schedule allows, and to talk more if you have any thoughts as we go through this session, or even beyond that now. And thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Iain. That's great. We do have a question, one from Rebecca Traherne, who works with the Vale of Glamorgan Council. And her question is, how can you encourage landowners and landlords to engage when they're not interested? And I think this is probably something which is quite common, where you have very large corporate landlords who operate from a distance. I don't know if that's who Rebecca is thinking of, but I understand that's quite a common scenario. How do you approach these difficult absentee landlords?
Well, I think the first and important thing to say, because in this conversation, absentee landlords often very quickly comes up, but I think we didn't ought to assume that local ownership was a breeze either. And I think we shouldn't get too focused on absentee landlords, because again, for a range of reasons, some local ownership, even some public sector local ownership, has its own challenges and ways of getting forward. But I think there are 3 elements to it. I think one is the engage part. So being on the case, demonstrating that the place cares and is interested and is determined to make this happen. There's the recruitment part of it. So as I've said, that we do an audit, we work out how many vacant units we've got and why they are vacant, but we're also doing a what's missing audit. So we're looking at what could your place have, what would people like to see it have, and then actively going out and recruiting those types of businesses and trying to encourage them to take an interest, looking at neighbouring places and seeing where there are businesses and organisations that are ready to expand, ready to have a second unit or third unit or fourth unit, and encourage them to come to your place. So the second element is that you're then giving agents and landlords some more options. You're presenting them with some potential new occupiers, which I think helps the process. And then the other element, I think, which we're increasingly now starting to see examples of councils and some business improvement districts doing, is we're understanding what the barriers are. One of the big barriers is about the cost of refitting a unit, of getting it back into a usable shape. And that, I think, as colleagues later will talk about in more detail, particularly applies to heritage and historic buildings, because they can be more costly to bring back into space. And there's an impasse between landlords and the incoming tenant of who's going to pay, who pays that for that bit, who pays for that to get that going. And sometimes the deal never happens because that can't be overcome. And we're seeing councils intervene with grant funding, with business rate relief, to allow some kind of public place contribution to overcome those barriers. So I think there are a number of ways. And the encouraging side, the first project I worked on in an Oxfordshire market town had 23 vacant units, so kind of mid-teens percentages, and the number of vacant units reduced from 23 to 3 in 18 months. So, even with some trickier units, some units in poor state, and with absentee landlords, we got from there to there in what I think is a reasonably quick order.
Yeah, great. Okay, that's really useful. We've had a question from Frank Malloy, who says, do you have a view on the concept of focusing on a core town centre, oh, it skipped my screen, or repurposing peripheral town centre retail units? I imagine that's a very big discussion, very area dependent. And I don't know if you think it's something appropriate for this forum where we are looking at historic town centres, but if you wanted to say something on that.
Yeah, just very quickly. So absolutely, it depends very much on the place and where you are. But I'm nervous always about this idea that there's a kind of secondary part of a town or a city centre that you can just kind of sweep away and allow to go to residential, or allowed to go to office, or even, as some places have done, just kind of knock them down. Because one of the things that's really key to getting your place up and running, if you've got a significant empty shops issue, is an incubator. So can new businesses take that route from being online or being a startup or being on a market and finding a unit to start up in, and then find another unit to grow into or to develop into? And I think if we start chipping away at those starter units, which are typically to be found around the edges of our places, then there is a chance that what we might do is we might choke that off. And I think we'll have made a mistake. So I'm always very keen to say to places, before you think about repurposing or going to residential or demolition, do this audit, understand why the units that you've got are vacant, but importantly also understand what the demand is. Don't assume that because you've got those vacant units, nobody's interested, because that's very often not the case. Understand who's interested and how you could support them to get into those units. And only then, if you've still got too many, think about the other uses.
Yeah, great. Okay. And we're running a couple of minutes over. There's a couple of questions that have come in from Emma Jenkins and Charles Parkin, which I will ask, and they're about the role of the planning team, the local authorities' planning policies in enabling town centre development or restricting new developments on the edge of towns, and also what's the role of the enforcement team within that on specific developments in the town centre. So I'm guessing that you're going to say you need to have a lot of cooperation between the bid, between the local authority and joined up thinking on that. But have I missed anything there?
No, and again, since we're specifically talking about historic and heritage buildings, that is one of the frustrations that landlords and agents and businesses express, that because we're caring for those buildings and because they've got additional challenges and additional kind of regulations, that they can be some of the hardest to get back into use, when for all the reasons that we love them and value them, we ought to try to make them so that they're the easiest and the quickest to get back into use, because they also have a very positive impact if they're being used and get back into use. So I think we have to work on the balance between looking after them and being thoughtful about how they move forward, but also not being in the way of them moving forward, and creating that balance. And a number of colleagues have talked about whether or not we couldn't do more work on creating kind of case study portfolio nationally of how we've brought vacant units that are historical heritage back into use, so that people can draw on them, so that every time we do it, we don't have to start from scratch, and we look at and we share much more of the positive ways that we've brought historic and heritage units back. So yes, a vital role for the planning team, a vital role also for national planning policy. I think some of us in placemaking would argue that we don't have the national policy right currently around permitted development, about conversion of shop and hospitality units into residential, and that again, we've done those things thinking there's loads of empty shops everywhere and nobody wants them, when that isn't the case, and we may have created some additional barriers. But and quickly on enforcement, you can hear from the presentation that I'm very keen on a partnership approach, on working together on landlords and agents understanding what the place wants and needs, and vice versa. But I think also we have to be realistic and say that we do, in some cases, at some point when we've tried, need to take the enforcement through as well.
Yeah, and a consistent enforcement approach, I think, gives people the clarity about what they can and can't do. We have a number of questions coming in. You've inspired a lot of thought in people.